So now, as we get ready to introduce the speaker, we have, yes, Brad, you're here. Thank you. Brad Williams. Brad leads Spitfire Advisors. He works with clients to create business strategies and develop commercial transactions while providing hands-on leadership to fulfill those plans. He has more than 30 years of practical development, M&A management, finance, and EPC experience. You know, many of you hear more and more about hydrogen as a potential resource, and I know we have a lot of questions about that in our industry today. Well, Brad is going to provide those answers, and we'll discuss hydrogen as a greener tool for powering tomorrow. So please help me in welcoming Brad to the stage. Brad, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good to be here. And thank you, Mike and everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk. I've met some really nice people and have enjoyed the experience. Leah does a great job. She was on me. I need that presentation. I need it now. I want it in this format and make sure it's good. Okay, so you will be the judge. So important lessons learned from yesterday. I am not a salesman. I am not here to sell anything. I'm here to try and give information so that you can make informed decisions. So that's my goal here today. So let's see what mischief we can stir up. Hydrogen is very much in the public right now. The president's very much talking about it. The Secretary of Energy is down in Houston promoting hundreds of thousands of tons of hydrogen. She didn't talk about the price. And that's what I want to get into is the economics and the commercial aspects of hydrogen. And an important fact, we're going to discuss here a lot of chemistry, a lot of technology, a lot of math. The good news is there's no test and you get to take the answer sheet home. I will mention that the slides I'm using today, the slide deck that'll be posted is actually got a lot more information. So would encourage you to get that presentation and take it back to your team, and hopefully I've given you a lot of useful information. Just to start with quickly, hydrogen is one of the most important elements in the galaxy. I am from the future, I am from outer space, so hopefully I can share a little bit about using hydrogen as a fuel. Most hydrogen is made out of natural gas, also coal. That doesn't seem to make sense, but you take steam, high pressure, and natural gas, and that's how you make hydrogen. What people are talking about now is green hydrogen, using renewable electricity, wind and solar or hydro, and putting that into what they call an electrolyzer. And in essence, you are breaking the water molecule into hydrogen and getting oxygen, which sounds pretty good. And that science is all proven technology. So, electrolysis, very simple math. This has been around a long time. It's, in essence, using electricity to break water. But you do have to have water to use the electrolyzer to make the hydrogen. Now, again, talking about chemistry and politics. So we've got green hydrogen, which is made out of renewables. You've got blue hydrogen, which is traditional natural gas, but you capture the carbon on the back end of the SMR, the steam reformer, and you sequester that. Either use it for producing oil, which again doesn't seem to really make sense, but or you can put it into old reservoirs. So that's what they mean by blue hydrogen. And then gray hydrogen is, in essence, coming from the natural gas of an SMR, but you're using renewable natural gas, like from a pig farm or manure or that kind of thing. So that's another form of hydrogen they call turquoise. The gray hydrogen is traditional. Some people call it brown, some people call it black, some people call it just bad. So these are the colors you get to deal with, but green hydrogen is really the holy grail, the unicorn that people are after. Oh, I forgot to ask, how many MMBTUs are in a ton of hydrogen? Well, the answer is right there. Somebody say it. So just to give you a little perspective, 114 MMBTUs per metric ton of hydrogen. And I think most people here are gas and electricity people, so MMBTU is a language that I use a lot, but hydrogen is most often in tons and kilograms and megajoules and pascals, so there's a lot of units. So I want to try and give a little bit of flavor for how you can move between electricity, hydrogen, CO2, and methane, good old natural gas. So an important thing to think about, a kilogram of hydrogen has about the same energy content as a gallon of gasoline, just to try and give you a little perspective. Now, the interesting thing is it takes about 3 gallons of water to make a kilogram of hydrogen. And so think of taking 3 gallons of water and getting the energy that's in a gallon of gasoline. And it's not seawater. You know, a lot of people say, oh, we'll just, put a plant next to the ocean and we'll use all the seawater. It has to be relatively clean water. It could be the water off of a waste treatment plant. That's clean enough. But you would have to clean up river water, which is not too big, but it is an extra step that often people ignore. So here's a lot more math and some conversions, and these are the things that you give to the staff and say, okay, here's the scorecard, now you know how to talk hydrogen. So the other interesting thing with hydrogen is pressure for transportation, compression, or liquefying it. Now, the bad news is you've got to go to minus 400 degrees for hydrogen to liquefy. The worst news is it takes 30% of the energy to actually do that liquefaction. So that's part of the problem. That's a cost. So just to move along, there are a lot of hydrogen facilities around. I did not appreciate, but I was talking to the team from Aiken, South Carolina, and they've actually got a little a hydrogen production plant, and they're producing hydrogen there, and they're actually selling it to the general public, which I did not know. This talks a little bit about the geography of where hydrogen is. The country right now is using about 10 million tons a year. What's that mean? That's about 300,000 MMBTUs per day. So, it's an interesting marketplace, but it's been traditionally for refineries, chemical plants, things of that sort. The big companies, you may know, Air Liquide, Prax, which is now, they bought Praxair, Linde, and Air Products. And they're out moving hydrogen, and they wish that this whole thing would go away, because they've been making a lot of money taking air, taking water, and making hydrogen and making lots of money, and nobody ever bothered them. Now their phone's ringing off the hook, and now the regulators are calling them going, I didn't know there was a hydrogen pipeline through this state. So a lot of issues around that. So what happened famous back in 1776? Well, the United States got born, right? Well, some people would say, chemists would say, well, a more exciting event was the development or the science of hydrogen. So hydrogen's been around a long time. 1800, people started using it, talking about it more. And then in 1845, before the American Civil War, they actually created the first fuel cell. So, as I said, this technology's been around for a while. The last bullet, I like history, so I thought that this might be a little fun fact for you. Maybe you can win a free drink. The Hindenburg did not catch on fire. It wasn't the hydrogen that gave it lift. It was actually the paint on the skin. They didn't realize it at the time, but that paint was highly flammable. And so there was an electricity storm, lightning strike, and that's what caused the Hindenburg fire. It wasn't the hydrogen that was stored in the Zeppelin. So most of the hydrogen, as I said, is used for refineries and for chemical plants, but also for fertilizer. And in the Midwest here, lots and lots of ammonia goes for corn and crops and all that type stuff. So that's a lot of what hydrogen is used for, and it's important as a fertilizer for food. I did bring a small bottle of hydrogen. You might be able to see it from where you are. And good news, bad news, it's not poisonous. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it was in there, promise. So, let's see, what's next here? Oh, I put this in because I wanted to appreciate that there are hydrogen transportation systems out there. I didn't know about the one in Aiken, but there are not very many. There's about 41 filling stations in the whole state of California. So it is very much in the early stages of development. So we haven't seen Exxon and Shell and those guys jump in with both feet just yet. But Shell is a leading retailer of hydrogen in California, but there's only 41 stations. So talking about hydrogen as a chemical, I mentioned odorless. It can be a volatile fuel. It does have a flash point, a wider flash point than methane. So you do have to have real serious safety concerns around using hydrogen. But it does disperse really quick because it's very, very light. And so that's a good thing, but being very light means it's hard to transport. It's hard to compress. It's hard to liquefy. So the transportation of hydrogen is expensive. Kind of talked about where we use it in refineries. I thought this was an interesting scientific answer. As the products of the reaction are at a lower energy level than the reactants, the result is an explosive release of energy and the production of water. Well, that's how you consume it. That's the scientific approach. We just use it in an engine or a fuel cell. So there's upcoming slides here talk a little bit about the cost of making hydrogen, and then I'll talk about the cost of transporting it. So you do need water, as I said. Think about a kilogram, $1 a kilogram is about $8.50 an MMBTU. Well, if you look at the second bullet up above, gasoline at $2.50 a gallon is about $21 an MMBTU. Often people don't appreciate how expensive gasoline is on an MMBTU basis, but that's one reason gasoline is good, is because you got a whole lot of energy in a very small space. It's the exact opposite with hydrogen, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So on the left, you see $8.50 for $1 a kilogram. That $1 a kilogram is traditional natural gas into hydrogen with an SMR. Brown, black, gray, whatever you want to call it. That has been traditional. That is not what environmentalists or politicians want to see. They want to use green hydrogen with electrolysis, which is the price on the far right. So RBN, if you're interested in hydrogen, they actually have something called a hydrogen bulletin board, and it's free. And they have a good story once a week talking about hydrogen. And the guys at RBN I talk to all the time, and I would say that they're very knowledgeable in the space. So I'm going to read the last bullet. Green power, solar or wind, at $30 will give you hydrogen at about $2.90 a kilogram. Well, that's $24, almost $25 an MMBTU. So it is not inexpensive. This is a summary looking at producing hydrogen based on gas price. I personally think you're going to have pretty stable natural gas prices for a while, maybe around $3 for quite a while to come. Fracking has done a good thing for the country and given us a lot of cheap energy. And now we want to turn that cheap natural gas into more expensive hydrogen. That's an interesting math problem somebody's going to have to explain to me. But if you think about how electrolysis works, people are assuming, and this is probably a good assumption, that science is going to take over and that you will see the cost of producing hydrogen come down. But right now, as I said, with traditional SMR, we're kind of in that $1 to $1.50. And then if you're using $30, that gets you to about $2.90 per kilogram, which is $25 an MMBTU. This is another slide from a different authority talking about how they see price, but it kind of all rolls into the same thing. There are different types of electrolysis technology, and the scientists are working a lot on this right now. The federal government is spending a lot of money on research, just like they are with batteries. And there are a lot of study groups and a lot going on. There's a lot of information online, and in the slides that are in the handout, I've got a lot of website links to give you connections to some of that data. So here's kind of where the rubber hits the road, as they say. So on the left, or the bottom green, you can see the cost of production, about $1.50 a kilogram. But the real killer is the cost of transportation. Compression, liquefaction, trucking, staffing, filling stations, storage, all the things that the gasoline industry already has to be created. And that is not inexpensive, because hydrogen is very hard to compress and very hard to liquefy. So if you think about that $1.50 to make it, the killer is to transport it, to store it, and to get it into a car or a truck is about $7. And that $7 equates to about $60 an MMBTU. So think about gasoline at $10 or $12 a gallon. That's the theoretical hurdle that people are going to have to get comfortable with. Would you choose to pay $12 for a hydrogen fuel fill-up versus where we are today? So I was talking a little bit, a little more science, a little more technology. On a volumetric basis, hydrogen 270 BTUs with versus natural gas at 1020, 1030. So that's part of the issue. And that's why we put gasoline into cars, because you have a lot more energy in that small volume. And that's part of the problem we get to with hydrogen. I talked a bit about green. I think you understand using solar and wind. You put that into the electrolyzer, and then what do you do with it then? Well, you can truck it or build a hydrogen pipeline. And I want to talk a little bit more about what that means. Part of the issue you have with burning hydrogen in a conventional engine is you get a lot of NOx. You don't get so much CO2 or other particulates, but you do get NOx. And that's why hydrogen in a car, a conventional car, is not a good thing. That's why you see Ford and General Motors and Toyota, it's all fuel cell technology, because that really is zero emissions for road fuel, if you can pay the price. So the technology's there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. For power guys and gas guys like me, I think the important thing, this is some more math talking about how many cubic feet you get from electrolysis, how much natural gas do you have to put in. So I'm not going to go through all the math here, but you've got the study sheet to take home, so I hope that's helpful. I think the important thing to realize is that if you put 1 megawatt of solar or wind into electrolysis, you get about 42, 43 MMBTUs of hydrogen out the back end. So that gives you a little bit of feel. So you got to have a whole lot of wind and a whole lot of solar to make any significant amount of hydrogen. Any questions out there? Okay, well, there is a test coming up. So I was talking about fuel cells and how they work. Hyundai has got a workable technology. The good thing is that people have been working on hydrogen for a long time. When oil was $100 a barrel, people were using natural gas for vehicles, and LNG was going to be the next renaissance. But there were a whole lot of people putting money into research to use hydrogen because they knew that it was zero or very, very low carbon emissions. So a lot of money's been put into it. The technology's there. We don't have to invent the wheel. This is all pretty available stuff as long as you can afford it. The important thing, too, is it's not just cars, but there are now trucks, 18-wheelers, that can store enough hydrogen on board that they can go like 300 miles, 350. So it is a workable fuel for long-haul transport. And that's part of the math model is what's it cost to buy one of these trucks? It's a little more expensive than a diesel truck, and it's harder to find hydrogen at this point. So you would probably use the trucks where you've got a nest, like in a harbor, like Long Beach or LA. They use LNG for all their trucks. The Port of Houston would be a good place to use hydrogen. So a lot going on. The important thing, too, with these 18-wheelers, the complaint with natural gas was that you didn't get enough acceleration. You mashed on the gas, you didn't get what you needed. Well, Tesla broke the code on that, so when you get in a Tesla and you push the pedal down, you're going like a gunshot. The trucks, the 18-wheelers, have developed the engine package now so that you get enough torque that you can handle a 50 or 80,000 pound load. And that's what those guys are looking for. They didn't want to have a load restriction on an 18-wheeler chassis. So a little more information about a fuel cell in a car. You basically put hydrogen in. There is a process in the fuel cell to produce electricity. The electricity then uses a motor to produce work, and off you go. And Tesla has done a really good job of selling their product, but it really is workable. Now, most of these cars have an onboard battery, and that battery is typically charged when you press the brake. So they are trying to capture as much energy as they can to make it as efficient as possible. That's a technical term for what a fuel cell is. I mentioned Shell. This is one of their filling stations out in California. Looks just like a gasoline pump. You pull up and you can get a full load of 15 to 30 kilograms of hydrogen in about 4 minutes. So it's a pretty quick fill. A bus takes about 10 minutes to fill, and it holds about 30 or 35 kilograms. And it can go 300 miles in a day. So they'll fill up a bus in the morning, it'll drive all day, and then they're good to go. California, you can see this is where their fueling stations are around the big cities, and it is, as I said, a little bit expensive. This is an interesting program. It's a bus program out in Orange County, and they've got 10 buses, yes, 10, running on hydrogen now. And they use about 30 kilograms a day. So when they get to their full build out of 50, they'll be using about 1,500 kilograms a day, and they need about 5 megawatts of wind or solar to generate that fuel. So it is ongoing, and 5 megawatts is not that much solar to put on the ground, but it is only going to run about 50 buses. But it could be useful. Atlanta's got 10 buses running, and Aiken's got 1. So it is a business that's, let's say, in its formative stages. Back to the question of how much does it cost. In California, to go fill up, it's about $12.85 to get your tank per kilogram. That works out to about $120 an MMBTU because it's the cost of transportation. It's not just the production cost, it's getting it to the pump. And oh, by the way, they're still taxing it as a road fuel. Now that's one way they could levelize the playing field a bit, is take the tax off of the hydrogen. But the state doesn't want to do that because they need that money. So you can see in the photograph here, that's a hydrogen storage tank. And you can see the bus on the right pulling up, and it's just like the Shell pump. You put it in just like you would with a car pump to refill. So take a deep breath and remember that creativity is important. And there's a lot of scientists out there working on stuff. But even with creativity, safety is paramount, right? And you have to be careful with hydrogen. You don't want to smoke a cigarette. You don't want to be on your cell phone. But it really, it is a controlled transfer process from the pump into the vessel, as opposed to gasoline where you see the vapors coming out. So really a hydrogen refill can be safer than gasoline. So I'm glad I wasn't driving the forklift that day. So talking about distribution, there are pipelines to move hydrogen, and it does take a different type of technology. And that's part of the issue that you get into with hydrogen. You can't just use existing natural gas pipelines for hydrogen. The hydrogen really will react with a carbon steel pipe, and there are issues with embrittlement. And then you also have problems with the valves and the gaskets in flanges. So when people say, oh, we're just going to convert the whole natural gas network to hydrogen, we'd have to say probably not. But there are about 1,600 miles of hydrogen pipeline. You probably never read about it. It's very safe. It's been operating for a long time, since the 40s. So it is the same kind of thing, off-the-shelf technology. So we can transport it by pipeline. We can transport it by compressed trucks. We can liquefy it and put it in a tank truck. And these are a couple of pictures. On the left is a tube trailer where you're compressing it to about 7,000 psi. It's pretty safe. Even if the truck turns over, you're probably not going to have a rupture. And then you see liquid tank trucks hauling gasoline all the time. But where that'll hold, 2,000 MMBTUs, with a liquid truck, you've got more like 470 MMBTUs. So the unit cost of transportation is high. This is part of the problem with hydrogen that we've got to overcome. So what this tells you is you'll probably build hydrogen plants close to the load center, which is contrary to natural gas or power generation, where transmission is relatively cheap. So, looking at these numbers, it will tell you it's about $2 a kilogram, or about $17 an MMBTU to transport hydrogen by truck. So on top of your $15, $18, $20 an MMBTU to make the hydrogen, you're adding another 17. So you can see where the math is tough. The economics commercially, unless it gets mandated by the policymakers, is all pretty tough stuff. I did talk a bit about pressure. 3,600 PSI is pretty high pressure. And that's part of where the cost comes from to try and get all that hydrogen into these tube trailers. This is a map of the Air Products pipeline on the Gulf Coast. The little red dots are where they're making hydrogen, and then the pipeline is moving about 1.4 BCF a day of hydrogen. Who knew how much hydrogen was moving along the Gulf Coast? But they've done a really good job, and most of it's for chemical plants and for refineries. But hopefully this backbone is going to start to be delivery points for people to build new green hydrogen, and they could transport it on this existing backbone and get it to where it's needed. Like think of New Orleans converting all their buses to run on hydrogen would be one of the tools in the toolbox. So just to try and equate this, 1.4 BCF a day of hydrogen is about 388,000 MMBTUs. A 1,000 megawatt power plant uses about 150 or 160,000 MMBTUs in a 16-hour day. So you think about all this hydrogen would supply 2,000 megawatts of power generation. It doesn't even move the needle. It doesn't even have any impact based on the whole country. So there's going to have to be a whole lot of hydrogen made. So I don't want to get into too much of the detail here. There are a couple of other pipeline networks. Linde and Air Liquide both have pipe networks that are in the same neighborhood. They're about half the size of Air Products. But I suspect there'll be more hydrogen pipelines built in the coming years. I did talk a little bit about cars and trucks using fuel cells. Who knows what the word Miria, what does that mean in Japanese? Anybody? There's a prize. I brought prizes. Means the future. So I guess we don't have many Japanese speakers here. Mike. Hajimemashite. So back to our story. The good thing is that these cars perform just like a gasoline car, but they are not inexpensive. You think about $60,000 for a fuel cell vehicle. That's pretty up there. My Ford F-150 fully leathered out and everything else is still little less than $60,000. So it's going to be tough to get people to convert on a pure economic basis. They really have to be motivated for the environment. I had talked a bit about the trucks, the trucks that Toyota is building, the ones down in the bottom right there, 670 horsepower. These are big, powerful trucks. They can do everything that a diesel truck can do. And that's the important thing that operators want, is they want that same fuel flexibility, but they don't want to pay more money. And that's where the difficulty comes in. So I think that there's going to have to be some political decisions made. Just talking about small-scale power generation, there's a plant operating in Italy, turbines on 100% hydrogen. There's a 1 megawatt turbine that Kawasaki put on the ground in Kobe. And that plant is the kind of plant I think you could see in the United States. Distributed generation where you have on-site, you're using water to make hydrogen, and you got the turbine right there in your load center where you need it, zero emissions. That's a key. And I did mention that there is NOx when you burn hydrogen in a turbine, but that's pretty easy to clean out. So you can have very low emissions with hydrogen right in a load center. So that, I think, will be one of the things that people are motivated by. There is an ongoing test pilot project, Entergy, which is Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and New Orleans. They actually have officially come out and said that they want to put in a new turbine at their Sabine power plant, which is a natural gas combined cycle plant. And Mitsubishi has a technology today where you can blend in hydrogen with the natural gas right into the turbine, and you can still maintain low emissions, and you don't have any issues with the turbine. So this gives you a little bit of flavor for how you can apply hydrogen today at a utility scale. It's by blending it in with natural gas. Another project is out in Utah called Intermountain. It's an existing coal-fired plant that the city of Los Angeles, they didn't want a coal plant in California, so they built it in Utah, and then they built a DC power line. And then they decided, well, you know, we feel really guilty about using coal in Utah. We're going to convert it to natural gas. And then they felt guilty about natural gas, so they said, well, okay, we'll blend in some hydrogen. So this is a multi-billion-dollar conversion of a perfectly good coal plant. But it is going to be much more environmentally friendly, and California is certainly pointed in that direction. So they're going to have two turbines that's going to use natural gas and hydrogen blended in. Now the problem that I haven't gotten an answer to is, remember, you have to have water to make the hydrogen, and this is in the middle of the desert. So this is going to be an issue. This is just a little more information about the project and the blending and what they're doing. But again, it is off-the-shelf technology, so it is available. We don't have to invent the rocket ship. Remember, I'm from outer space. It's basically available. Unfortunately, you cannot run a gas turbine on 100% hydrogen right now. And so that research and that work is ongoing. People talk about using hydrogen or ammonia to run ships or to run airplanes. That's really at least 10 years off. The big companies like GE, if you want to blend hydrogen into an existing gas turbine today, you better read the fine print on your warranty and your service agreement, because I don't think GE is going to cover everything if you start blending in hydrogen. So another commercial aspect to keep aware of. These are just a couple of other projects around the world that Mitsubishi is working on. There are plants being built. Regulators in some of the states are saying, hey, this is a good idea. We're for greener technology. Let's put these pilot projects on the ground and make it happen. And we really don't care what it costs because it's so small. So it's a work in progress. I will say, too, Mitsubishi is doing a lot of battery work. So I know somebody was saying that they were putting batteries on the ground to be a part of their resource mix. It's a good tool. It's also a bit expensive, and the battery life isn't very long at this point. But using hydrogen at a load center can be an alternative to using batteries. So more math. Chemistry, math, conversions, all of these things. I wanted to just talk a little bit about how this compares to natural gas if you blend hydrogen into the pipeline. So you think you've got a 16-inch pipeline, you're moving about 200,000 MMBTUs a day of natural gas. If you do the math, you lose about 10% of the energy transport capacity by blending in 12% hydrogen. Because in essence, there's too much hydrogen, it displaces the natural gas. So in the same pipeline, you're only delivering about 182,000 MMBTUs. Does that make sense math-wise? No math teachers in here to correct me? So, you talk about high pressure. This is really high pressure. 11,000 PSI is typically what you would get in a storage tank at a facility. This is if you don't have access to liquefied hydrogen. With liquid, you get, of course, a lot more storage capacity in the same volume. If you want to liquefy it, you would go down to about 400 degrees minus. You think of LNG and how expensive that is to liquefy natural gas. That's minus 260. So these are part of the problems you get to with transporting hydrogen. Oh, regulation. This is where the existing hydrogen pipeline companies are cringing. FERC has come out and said any new hydrogen pipelines that get built, they think they ought to regulate those just like they do natural gas. I know that's not a good thing. So, I talked a little bit about the problems of embrittlement and using natural gas steel pipelines for hydrogen. This is just a little bit of the issues you get to. I mentioned the problems with valves and gaskets, but there's a lot of research going on, and in the handout deck that's on the website, there's some links to some of those research groups. And there's a group called HyBlend that's sponsored by the Department of Energy that has a 2-year program analyzing what could they do to utilize natural gas pipelines to move hydrogen. I talked a bit about Air Products and what they're doing and the transportation for hydrogen that they are moving around the countryside. You will hear, or if you read about hydrogen, there's H35 or H70. It's kind of like ethanol. You know, the E25 is 25% ethanol, E10 is 10% ethanol. It's the same thing here, but it's based on pressure. And it depends on what kind of vehicle you have and fuel cell, whether you use the H35 or H70. But H70 is 10,000 PSI. It is really high pressure. But these tanks are built to take it, and there's been all types of testing. They shoot it with high-powered rifles, they burn it, they crash it, and these tanks are designed a lot more safe than a gasoline tank in your car, for sure. Plug Power is building a big plant up in upstate New York, $290 million. They're going to make 45,000 kilograms a day of hydrogen, which sounds like a whole lot until you do the math that you now know how to do, and you're getting not a whole lot, 5,000 MMBTUs a day of energy. That's not going to run a very big power plant, and you need 120 megawatts of solar, wind, or hydro to make that hydrogen. So a 100 megawatt solar farm is a pretty big solar farm. So you think about how much water you need for that too. This would be about 135,000 gallons a day, which may sound like a lot, but a golf course will use about 1 million gallons a day in the summer. So it's really not that much water until you're starting to want to provide 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts of electricity. So 180 megawatt power plant, natural gas-wise. Air Liquide is building a small liquefaction plant up in Quebec. Just another example of how this technology is getting put to work, but it is small scale and big dollars. And that's really the challenge we're going to have to overcome. There's projects in France, Germany, Spain. The European Union is very much on top of trying to promote these projects. The EU has put up billions now for companies to convert, and that is actually starting to happen. They're using offshore wind in the EU to basically create green hydrogen that'll get moved around the European Union. There's a little more math here for the math majors in the class, talking about the costs and the economics around doing these projects. I guess talking about what's the future for hydrogen in the United States and really the world. You have to think about lowering the cost of producing hydrogen, but really we need to work on how are we going to address the cost of transportation. Building new hydrogen pipelines, fuel supply depots, filling stations for the general public, all of those kind of things. And it is about energy density. And that's why gasoline was so successful early on. You could put a whole lot of energy into a 15-gallon tank for your car and go 450 miles. So price, and price. The cost of transportation, the cost of production. So how are we going to break that code? I talked about storage and compression, liquefaction, those kind of things. Hydrogen is really still pretty much a specialty gas for chemical plants, refineries. It has not made it mainstream yet, but the government wants that to happen. And that's how we got wind and solar, was tax credits. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the government can be really instrumental in trying to make that happen. And that's where I wanted to kind of conclude is what is the greener future and how do we get there? I think it comes down to governments and political action groups and people, individuals making a choice that they want to be greener. But it will be the governments, the regulators who say, we want it to happen and we're going to let you pass the cost through. But unfortunately, that comes to my dinner table and your dinner table when you're paying $15 a gallon equivalent for your road fuel. Think about paying $12 or $15 a gallon for gasoline today. That'd be a really hard pill to swallow socially. Even if a state mandates it, maybe like California, it'll be an evolution, not a revolution. I mean, we got wind and solar. It took about 20, 25 years to get an impactful amount of wind and solar on the ground. And I would say it'll probably be about the same to get hydrogen to a point where it's a mainstream fuel. But the technology's there. The will is there to be greener. The problem we got to work on is the math and the commercial economics of that. and will people accept it? Because President Biden and the administration are pushing this very green agenda, but you don't hear them talk about the price. And I think when that starts to get to be more widely distributed, you're going to have a real catfight at the next election. And that's part of where I think this story goes. So I did mention California. Yes, they have outlawed internal combustion engines by 2035. So the start has begun. And I think that's where I'll leave you, and we can answer, or hopefully I can answer questions, but I'll take questions. But California has outlawed internal combustion engines. You won't be able to buy a gasoline-powered car in 2035 in California. And they've only got 41 hydrogen filling stations today. So if anybody needs to run catch a plane, no offense, but I think we're open for questions. I didn't overwhelm you with math, I hope.
Hey, Brad.
Yes.
Over here, we've got a couple of questions from our virtual audience. The first one is, batteries suffer in the colder climates. How does hydrogen perform in the north?
Yeah, that is a good question. It is not an issue. Much like gasoline, you don't have issues with cold. And a fuel cell will operate fine in heat or cold. So would say that's not a big hurdle.
Very good. And our second one is, they were wondering if you could comment on what widespread adoption of hydrogen would do to water supplies.
Well, it is a consideration, especially if you're trying to convert a coal plant to hydrogen in the middle of the desert, right? So it is a consideration that has to be rolled in. But fresh water today is a real problem in the United States and around the world. So I think you are going to have to see with big scale hydrogen, you're going to have to see desalinization of seawater or brackish water like from a harbor, Tampa or Houston or Los Angeles. They're already doing it. And it is going to be an issue. 3 gallons of fresh water, clean water, to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And remember, 45,000 kilograms of hydrogen is only 5,000 MMBTUs for a power plant. So it is going to be a lot of water. Good question. She was just combing her hair. She was not a question. Oh, no. The teacher's going to ask a question.
Actually, Brad, just so you kind of talked about the practicality of it. You kind of had some Q&A yesterday with a couple of the speakers, or one of the speakers. Is there kind of technology on the horizon? You talked about this 20-year window in terms of deployment and that, and again, we're looking at existing technology. You talked about the challenges of transportation, et cetera. Do you see something out there that could change this? You know, we kind of fairly typical with alternative fuels and things like that on the front end. It's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And, you know, we had $60 wind 10 years ago, and now we're at $10 wind. So where do you see kind of the next step? You talked about where the challenge is, but what's the next step, do you think?
Yeah, that is also a good question, because technology will advance and reduce the cost a certain amount. Just like we saw with wind and solar. You know, the wind turbines got bigger, reducing the unit cost. The technology of the wind where they could feather the blades to maximize capturing that wind. You know, that's where the scientists are in the laboratory trying to figure that stuff out. But there is physics. There is thermodynamics. There are physical laws of nature that, as so far, would not expect to be able to break. And this is where photovoltaic, you know, they have reached the limit of how they can convert sunlight into electricity. They're there. With fuel cells and electrolysis, taking that electricity to make work. I think that there'll be advancements, Mike, but it won't be a tenfold step change. And that's part of the issue, I think, is economics. You're not going to see that $60 come down to $20, at least not anytime soon. But there are a lot of smart people working on it. Did I answer your question?
Brad, you got one more question over there?
Sure.
Thank you for your discussion today, Brad. I'm Gary Franzen with CoServe. Couple questions. First off, when and if this does become commercially viable for transportation purposes, do you see it being used predominantly as a fleet fuel, like the buses that you already see in California, or do you see it eventually penetrating the consumer market, the individual family?
Yeah, the residential market for sure. In California, there are 4,000 or 5,000 residential cars running now. I mentioned they've got 41 filling stations. There's plans to have 200 hydrogen filling stations in California in the next, I'll say 12 to 18 months. So it is moving that way. Toyota, Hyundai, Ford, Cadillac. Cadillac's going to have a fuel cell vehicle. And so, it's coming. But I don't see in those commercials where they talk about the cost. You think about $60,000 for a Toyota fuel cell vehicle. It's a nice car on the inside. I've seen them. It is nice. It's got the stitched leather and stuff you like, but they're expensive.
Well, my kind of related question to that is for residential transport, have EVs got such a head start now that they're going to just dominate the industry, and what would cause hydrogen vehicles to overtake EVs or even catch up?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think electric vehicles will have a faster rate of penetration because of economics and ease of use. When you drive your electric vehicle into the house and plug it in, you get in the morning, you drive all day, you come home, plug it back in. Hydrogen filling like gasoline, there's just not many hydrogen touch points right now. So I think, yes, EVs will have a much faster pace of penetration. And I think cost-wise, they are more expensive than a gasoline car also. But it will be an evolution. Now, where's the electricity going to come from? So we're going to put hydrogen into the turbines to make the electricity to run the electric car. So it all fits together. It's a big spider web for sure. So, enough? Well, thanks for letting me be here and being good listeners. I hope it was some useful information. So.